So I got my commission through ROTC. I was an architecture major at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte before getting commissioned as an engineer officer. And then most of my early career was spent in the Tactical Army, like most engineer officers these days, with platoon leader time at Fort Bragg, followed by company command in Europe. And then I had the good fortune of going on to grad school at KU, get a master's degree in engineering, in civil engineering with an emphasis in structure. While I was at the Captain's Career Course a few years prior to that, I also did a master's in engineering management. That led to my first assignment with the Corps of Engineers, which happened to be here in Omaha District and in Colorado Springs area office. And that ended up being a great 2.5 years, 6 months of which was spent over in Iraq and in Baghdad as a reconstruction office OIC with the Corps of Engineers. And so following a 2.5 year assignment with Omaha District, I was like, man, I really like the Corps of Engineers, and I wanted to get back into the Corps of Engineers following my battalion S3 and XO time, which I was in a combat engineer battalion over in Germany for that. I was selected following my time in the 9th Engineer Battalion as the XO to go to Defense Logistics Agency 3 years, which was a good broadening experience. Very much a civilian office environment. About 2/3 of the individuals there were Department of Army civilians, similar to the Corps of Engineers. So that helped really develop my skills, I think, working with our civilian workforce within the Army, and I found that to be very rewarding and enjoyable. And then I was fortunate to get selected for Nashville District Command, 2 years down there, and then followed by a year at the Corps of Engineer Headquarters as the executive officer for General Bostic, and the last 2 months I was the executive officer for General Semonite, our current chief of engineers. Following that, then I had the opportunity to go to the Eisenhower School at National Defense University, doing a third master's degree, and then come here to Omaha District, where I've been for the last 3 years the district commander. So in total, I've had 8.5 years of my career has been with the Corps of Engineers. The rest has either been in an educational environment, 3 years at Defense Logistics Agency, and the rest in tactical engineer units. So prior to district command, well, this is my second district command. So I was at a definite advantage, having learned a lot in my first command in Nashville. But in addition to that experience, getting the opportunity to go off to the National Defense University's Eisenhower School, which is essentially an executive leadership course. They also had a series of pre-command courses, both Army pre-command course, which all 06 level commanders take, as well as the Corps of Engineers 1 week pre-command course and a legal pre-command course. I think I felt well prepared. Not just the education, certainly helpful, but really having already done a district command, really I felt far more prepared coming into Omaha District, knowing what to expect as a district commander. Vice my experience going into the Nashville District, I was less prepared for command there because it was my first time going into district command. At the district pre-command course that takes place in June each year, General Semonite, at the time, he was a division of the chief at the time, came in and spoke to the entire class for an extended period of time of what his expectations were as a chief for district commanders, which I thought was very engaging. Now, I already knew General Semonite quite well, so I'm pretty familiar with his view on a lot of those issues. And also, at the time, our division commander here within the Northwestern Division was General Spellman. General Spellman also did counseling with me, where we sat down and discussed some of his priorities, some of the things that he saw as strengths within Omaha District, areas that I could focus, that he wanted me to focus some attention on within the district. So we had a good pre-command counseling. Well, it certainly differs significantly in a few ways. One way is when you go into a tactical battalion or brigade command, as a colonel, you and the sergeant major are the most experienced, knowledgeable individuals within that organization, right? So they are the organization is looking to that tactical commander and tactical sergeant major for the direction, answers, and solutions to problems. When you come into the Corps, I'm surrounded by career professionals who've been doing the job 20 or 30 years, and they are the subject matter experts. So the organization isn't looking for me necessarily to solve technical problems and issues in the same way you might find in a tactical unit, because I'm surrounded by folks with greater experience in their specific lanes. Rather, they're looking for an individual to provide that leadership and broader guidance than just the more tactical, which you'd get in the military unit. In addition, leading civilians versus leading military, I think requires the officer to be more patient about building a consensus for the decision that's being made, and to more extensively socialize that decision to get the buy-in of the organization, to get the input from the organization. In the tactical unit, decisions are required on a more decisive manner, I think, than you find in the Corps, in a more rapid manner, oftentimes with less information than what's required in the Corps. In the Corps, we have a little more time, most of the time, to make a decision. We can be more deliberative in the decision-making process and involve that civilian counsel and input into the decision more so than maybe you'd experience in a tactical unit. I very much view myself as a consensus builder. I think I'm generally pretty patient as we work through problems to come to a resolution. And I very much want to get the buy-in of the subordinate team, and to get us all, as one might say, rowing in the same direction. Because I think in building that teamwork, building a consensus around a decision, ultimately there's ownership in that, there's buy-in in that as subordinates, and when you do that, particularly in a civilian context, I think you achieve far greater results than if I'm just directive in nature. So while I at times need to be directive in nature in the role, in general I try to avoid being directive to the extent that's reasonable, and really get corporate board or other leaders to buy in on the decision so that they own the decision. So I think I'm fortunate being in my second command and with as much time within the Corps of Engineers. I have more extensive relationships with headquarters USACE personnel than many of the district commanders who are perhaps newer to the Corps of Engineers than I have. So that's really enabled me to work some enterprise level issues in a way that I wasn't able to work when I was a Nashville district commander, when I didn't have those relationships. Also I've been fortunate to have worked with General Helmlinger, several times in the past, to include when I was the executive officer for General Bostic. He was the chief of staff for General Bostic. So we worked very closely together for a year. So that's really helped, having that prior working relationships. We know each other well. And also, there are challenges though working with, particularly with division, because they are located in Portland, we're here in Missouri. That's a long way away geographically, so we don't have a lot of that face-to-face interaction, which creates some challenges. But with regular regional command counselors, at least pre-COVID, we had regular regional command counselors. That gave an opportunity for those dialogues. But sometimes it can be a challenge working with division, and in terms of where we want them to be engaged versus what we think is something that's a district level issue. And In general, I think we do a decent job at that between division staff and the district staff, but there's always points of friction, particularly coming out of this recent flood. How are we dividing up workload with long-term study and some of that stuff between districts? How is division involved or not involved with that? Well, the tribal relationship piece is one of the really interesting and unique aspects of the command. And Omaha District has one of the largest tribal relationship pieces. Like when I was in Nashville District, we had one tribe, and there really wasn't much going on with that tribe. Here we have well over 40 tribes that we engage with, and probably of that, there's a good dozen or so that we engage with extensively. And it's a challenge because every tribe has a different set of priorities, initiatives. They aren't a single block. And oftentimes, some of the tribes will have conflicting views on issues. So it can be a challenging group to work with in terms of balancing various priorities. I think when I look at our tribal relations right now within the district, one of the areas I see as a big accomplishment over the last few years is working with the Lower Rural Sioux tribe in addressing bank erosion issues along their tribal land and our reservoir, and specifically getting bank stabilization in there to protect their sewage lagoons. And we'll be executing the first Section 203 project in support of stabilizing an extensive length of their tribal land where it abuts our reservoir. So a very successful relationship there. I think I've had a good relationship with the 3 affiliated tribes up in North Dakota and western North Dakota. But we've had a very strained relationship with the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, as their chairman and I have not been on the same sheet of music, and we've had some challenges with the Omaha tribe as well. And it's difficult to balance, the very specific tribal priorities with some of our broader priorities. So it is a challenge, and it's something that certainly makes the job, it adds a dimension to this job that maybe isn't there in a lot of other districts. I think that's a big part of our mission as we look at the upper Missouri River Basin. We have 2/3 of the Missouri River falls within the district. You have the Platte River Basin, both North and South Platte. Part of the basin, the Yellowstone, right? The upper reaches of the Yellowstone is Yellowstone National Park, right? And even some of Glacier National Park drains into our basin. So some of the most pristine parts of our nation are within our basin. So how we work with not only addressing the 3 endangered species within the river system, but all of the ecosystem is vitally important in this part of the country. We have our MMRP program, our Missouri River Recovery Program. We have the Mr. Rick a relationship with all the stakeholders. And all of that is done in balance with our other missions, our navigation, water supply, flood control missions in the system. And oftentimes, I think they're painted, particularly in the media and by various stakeholders, at being at greater odds than they really are. I think a healthy ecosystem within the basin does support the other priorities, or other purposes, I should say, of the system, and benefits everybody who lives along the basin. So we have a huge environmental program within the district, and I think that's part of what sets us apart as a district, and an area that we spent a lot of energy on. Well, I'd certainly say we are learning organization, but I would caveat by saying that, a bureaucratic system that we operate in, I think oftentimes works against being a learning organization, right? So there's, I think, tension in that regard between a bureaucracy which likes to maintain a status quo, likes to maintain a structure, versus a learning organization that is more accepting and are willing to adapt and change to different circumstances. So there is a tension there. And something we struggle with, I think, as an organization, particularly in the area of technology too, where we lag industry in terms of technology that's used in many areas. A lot of that's because of cybersecurity concerns, more so than budget concerns, but all of that kind of plays into that piece. So, but some of the ways that we are a learning organization, I think, as we look at different metrics, how can we improve delivery, both on the PM side of things is important. You know, looking at alternative contracting models that enables us greater flexibility, like some of our MATOCs and SATOC contracts we rely on, are ways that we look at being an adaptive organization. And I think we demonstrated that, a significant demonstration of that was how we did our flood recovery operation, where we used some non-standard contracting models. We used our rapid response contracting models, and we built a team around addressing the problem, the devastation that resulted from the flood, and we had great results. And that wouldn't have happened if we just stuck with the rigid processes and systems that were in place. I think this is always a problem with an organization over time, right? As individuals reach retirement age after they've worked here 30 or 40 years, there is a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge that leaves with them. Sometimes we don't do a good job of capturing that. But one of the best ways to capture that is mentoring and development of that next generation of leaders within the organization. You know, other ways we do it is by moving some folks around. Like this last year, we had the branch chiefs within PM for 3 months. They rotated around and had a different branch chief experience. And that was a way to cross-pollinate between the branches, learn the good strengths and weaknesses of what's going on in each branches, and try to diversify that knowledge a little more so that when one individual leaves, you don't lose as much. But knowledge management continues to be a challenge both within Omaha District and I think really across the enterprise. And part of that is things move so fast. Technology's changing. The rate in which we work through problems and projects and the breadth of projects and problems we work on, all of that makes this knowledge management increasingly complex. Wish I had better solutions in that area, but it's going to be an ongoing challenge for the organization. When I first took command, things were pretty quiet in the basin in terms of congressional engagements. We were certainly doing some, and we were having healthy engagements. Some of the issues we were working on was like snow monitoring in the Upper Basin with Senator Round's office, and a few other hot issues out there. But the first half of command, congressional engagements was really a pretty small piece of what I was spending time and energy on, because you know it was pretty quiet across the basin. However, since the March 2019 flood, that has changed dramatically, particularly in the relationships with the congressional members in Nebraska and Iowa, which were most significantly impacted by the flood. And I think there was some strain in March and April of 2019 with that relationship, as we were all in the initial response to the floods. But since then, I think we have a very healthy working relationship established with all of the members, both in Nebraska and in Iowa, addressing the long-term recovery efforts we've been ongoing. And I feel we're in a really good place in those relationships. I've found all the members to be very proactive and engaging to work with. particularly on the Iowa side with Senator Ernst, Grassley, and Congresswoman Axney, and the work we've been doing on the flood recovery there, as well as I think Congressman Bacon here in Nebraska. We have a very good relationship with them, and they've been very helpful and supportive going forward. I think they've pushed us in a lot of areas we probably needed to be pushed in as an agency, as a district, and then they've also been very supportive in areas where we've needed their assistance. Well, that is a big challenge, right, for the district, because between our 4 business lines, there can be significant fluctuation year to year in the total workload. Most dramatically, we saw that here in the last year in the flood recovery, with nearly $500 million worth of work to be executed in flood recovery within a civil works program that's only usually a few $100 million. And that required a significant shift in resources, right? We stood up a team in our system restoration team of around 150 individuals focusing on the levee recovery. And we took almost all of those were out of Hyde. Now, some of them were rehired annuitants, but largely they were out of Hyde and out of the other programs we had, and we needed to continue doing that other work. So that's been a challenge here over the last year and a half. But more broadly, we are seeing, in past years, we'd seen a general decline, especially with the completion of the Stratcom building in our Milcon program. But now we're seeing a dramatic upswing. And certainly the next several years, you'll see significant growth with our Milcon construction program. Our environmental program, in general, is fairly steady. However, we are seeing significant growth in how we deal with PFAS, PFOA issue, an emergent contaminant, at many of our, particularly Air Force installations. That's going to be a major area of growth in the years ahead. Our fuels program has been very steady at 120, 130 million a year, but we've grown that team in order to better handle that workload, and I think that's been a big area of success the last few years. So, and then you have the wild card of our rapid response team and that suite of contracts. One year we'll maybe only have $100 million, maybe even less than $100 million work. Other years we could have over $500 million of work, as we saw with the Puerto Rico recovery efforts. So huge fluctuations year to year that's unpredictable, because largely it's in response to natural disasters. So it is a real challenge, I think, for the district to make sure we maintain and are responsive to significant changes in program between the across the 4 business lines as they fluctuate year to year. But because we have the depth of those 4 business lines, when one business line is significantly less a given year and another one significantly more, we are able to balance our resources, because consistently as a district, we are between 1.3 to 1.5 billion each year, and so overall our workload hasn't increased that dramatically. In each business line there are greater fluctuations, but we're able to balance that. And that's something that Ted Streckfus as the DPM and I work on extensively. How do we keep that balance, working with the corporate board? It's interesting as individuals look at various districts, and they have a tendency just to see the part of the district that they interact with. So a lot of folks view Omaha district as a huge civil works district, and really civil works is less than a quarter of our program typically, and most of it really involves around our support to the military, particularly the Air Force. The Air Force represents a third to as much as a half of our program annually, between all the installations we support and the national work we're doing on the environment. And so balancing the civil works mission and the Milcon mission hasn't proven to be that big a challenge internally, because I think we have really good systems already in place. Within engineering, we share a lot of those engineering resources depending on the workload. Construction seems to do a good job, because from their perspective, to a large extent, a project's a project, whether it's on the civil works or Milcon side. So we're able to actually build on the strengths that both programs provide to actually have a more robust program overall. So when I first came to the district, there were two huge projects we were just finishing up. The first was the VA Aurora Hospital project out in in Denver, Colorado. Actually in Aurora, but in the Denver area. And that was a huge project. It was the first VA hospital the Corps had taken over responsibility for executing from the VA, and it proved to be a tremendous success for the district. That along with Stratcom were the two big ones my first year. Stratcom is the new headquarters for U.S. Strategic Command. A huge project for the district, something I think we can take great pride in, and a very challenging project as well. But since then, we've really moved into a new set of projects. One is the weapons generation facility, which is really a nuclear weapons storage facility. They're building it at F.E. Warren. That's going to be the first in a whole series of weapons generation facilities that will be built at Air Force facilities across the country. I think, being the first one of this new generation facility is a significant project for the district. In addition, coming up, we're going to have this B-21 program up at F.E. Warren, which will be one of 3 installations that ultimately gets the B-21, which is the Air Force's new bomber. And so I think that's going to be a great program for Omaha District to be part of going forward. And we're just in the front end of that. And then also, here more recently, after the flood that was devastated, the Offutt Air Force Base had about a third of their facilities devastated. And we have 8 MILCON projects that result from that. And it's been interesting as an organization to be part of the initial design charrettes for those. And I think it's going to be something that the district's going to have some great projects over the next 3 to 5 years to execute out there, which will be able to put a lot of resources and energy into that will really reshape what Offutt Air Force Base looks like, in addition to the Stratcom building we just finished out there. Prior to the March 19th flood, which clearly is the most significant one for Omaha District, there was a couple hurricanes that hit the East Coast that created all kinds of devastation, both on the East Coast and obviously Puerto Rico, which was their entire electric grid was essentially wiped out. And it was really great to see how Omaha District personnel stepped up to the plate, volunteered to be part of the recovery effort, how effective our rapid response contracts were, both at the Matsu facility in South Carolina as well as in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We had, I think, almost 24 individuals who stayed on the Virgin Islands when that second hurricane came over so they could continue to support the U.S. citizens who live there in that territory. So it was great to see our response. We also responded to the wildfires out in California. All that was a more typical what I'd expect to see. And then when we endured our own disaster, the March of 2019 flooding that devastated the river system, it's amazing to see how the team came together both in the immediate aftermath and then here over the last 15 months in restoring the system. It has been a Herculean effort requiring tremendous work by all segments of our team, whether in our project management, our engineering, construction, contracting, legal, real estate. Real estate was a huge issue on it. All coming together to address the challenges was fantastic. I think you're going to see, certainly in the near term, as we wrap up the levee recovery work, on the civil work side, there'll be a large shift to our hydropower rehab program, right? We have a master plan in place. We're getting ready to do our first major rehab at Fort Randall, which will go out here for design, for award of the design here in next year. And you're going to see a lot of energy going into hydropower rehab in the years ahead on the civil works side. We're seeing significant growth within the MILCON program for the installations across our area responsibility. And I like to think of the installations that we support are really part of the strategic spine of our nation's national defense, because they deal with both our nuclear deterrence, both the missile defense system and the strategic air wings are based out of many of our facilities, as well as the comms link between our terrestrial assets and our assets up in space along the Front Range. And that connection, depending on where the nation decides to base the Space Force facility, that has a decent probability that that'll end up being within the Omaha's AOR. That's going to be a huge mission for us, building the Space Force headquarters facilities, whether it ends up being out in the Colorado Springs area or somewhere else, be huge and something that'll be a legacy for the district in the years ahead. In the near term, the challenge is going to be dealing with COVID and adapting to this new normal with COVID. What does the office environment look like as we start to bring folks back to the office? To what extent do we bring individuals back to the office? What does our district telework policy looks like? I think that's going to be a very challenging issue here in the near term. In the longer term, he's going to continue to have the challenge of balancing a very broad and diverse workload. And whether that's Milcon, a lot of challenging customers there, or whether that is a lot of the environmental and civil works issues along the basin. So it's such a diverse portfolio that the district deals with, and really knowing where to put time and energy within that diverse portfolio is going to continue to be a challenge for the leadership within the district, but it's one I'm confident he'll be able to do well with. Well, we've already started talking in a number of areas there. I have a rather extensive list of issues, and what I've told him is, here's the list of the gnarly issues you'll get to deal with. Some of them, as I look at these gnarly issues, I'd like to be part of, right? That's part of the engaging part of being district commander. You get to take on a lot of gnarly issues and kind of work and develop solutions for them. And some of them are really interesting, like how are we going to handle a growing Milcon program? How are we going to prioritize our effort and work in that area? How are we going to work with our levee sponsors to continue to improve the system and reduce flood risk? Those are challenging issues that I think are very engaging. Some of the other issues are less engaging, but every bit as important. Like, how are we as a workforce adapting to, this new normal, of COVID? And what does that look like for the workforce? How are we recruiting a workforce that can continue to excel in that environment and meet our mission? Well, we're still working through that, and right now the family and I were planning to stay here in Omaha, and I'll be transitioning out of the Army after 26 years. And not sure yet whether I'll go into the public or private sector in the next career. I mean, certainly I could go work presumably at one of the larger AEs or prime contractors and bring a lot of the core experience there, but I'm not sure that's necessarily the path I want to take, but we'll see what plays out over the next few months. Well, throughout my 3 years here at Omaha District, I've continually impressed by the technical competency and the dedication of the team, the mission focus, the can-do attitude that's across the district, whether here at the headquarters or out at our hydropower plants, our natural resource plant offices, the area offices within construction. You go out on the construction sites, and the professionalism and dedication that we see from our safety officers, our con reps, the project each day is impressive, and it's really rewarding to get to be part of such a strong team who is so dedicated to serving the nation and supporting the needs of our nation with our infrastructure, whether it's the civil works infrastructure or our military infrastructure, and it's really an honor to be part of the team. Well, I think we have some big challenges when it comes to how we execute our mission as an enterprise. Historically, we were a command-driven organization. That started to change in the 80s and then really in the 90s as we went from being a truly command-driven organization to one that was really, I would say, a project management-driven organization, both with the PMs as a lead for a PDT and the building of these project delivery teams, a very matrixed organization. Really, I would say since over the last 20 years or so, we've been a PM-driven organization. I think now, though, there's a very slow transition away from being a PM-driven organization, and I think we're in danger of being a contract officer-driven organization, which concerns me, because within the contract officer field in that profession, their job is to make sure of policy compliance and adhering to policies and procedures. They are less focused on execution. PMs are very focused on execution. Now, there's an important dynamic that's there between the contracting community of practice and the PM community of practice, and there's a built-in tension, which I think is a good tension. Now, that sometimes can become an unhealthy tension and true friction can develop. But it concerns me that the agency is drifting towards being a contract-driven organization where the commanders and the PMs have little influence over the timelines within the contracting realm on getting projects awarded. And I don't see this as the district level contracting folks really are having to respond to a bureaucratic overburden that's placed on it. Much of this burden is coming from outside the Corps of Engineers, from Army Contracting Command and broader DoD policies that are putting more and more controls in place, more and more policies in place, all of which are designed to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. But the burden is becoming so heavy that those policies are really, in their own way, becoming a waste and abuse of resources. We're so concerned about fraud taking place, and we have a risk-tolerant environment that we're significantly extending the timelines it takes to get contracts in place. The burdens we place on the contractors increases the cost of all of these contracts. We have less flexibility in execution of these contracts. And so we're drifting away from this PM-driven organization to one much more like the Air Force, which is really a contractor office-driven engineering community of practice. And I think that will impact our ability to deliver our mission for the nation. Well, I'm glad you asked me that question. That's something that I bring up fairly frequently when we run into various challenges within I think the organization, the enterprise. So I have my 3 laws of bureaucratic physics. A bureaucracy seeks growth, centralization, and perpetuation. Growth, bureaucracy always wants to get bigger. And there's a lot of drivers behind that. But some of them are just as simple as, I'm a supervisor, I manage an office, I want to continue advancing my career, I want to do great things. What supervisor ever says, I think my office needs to be smaller? No, a good supervisor always sees how their office can be bigger and provide more support. So they're continually providing arguments for why they need to have additional people, additional resources to grow. So there's growth. And that happens at the small office level all the way up to the major federal agency level and everything in between. Second is centralization. Well, if I decentralize stuff, I lose control of stuff. And if I want to both grow my enterprise, my team, my organization, I can centralize it. I can claim the different efficiencies that come with that, but really it becomes a control issue. And the third one is perpetuation. Have you ever seen a federal agency office that has no longer exists or mission's gone away? No. Bureaucracy is set up to they have this internal antibodies that prevent it from shrinking or for a mission to go away. Rather, it's the opposite. It attracts mission. It seeks to grow. So anytime as an organization we look to build efficiencies, truly build efficiencies in there, we are fighting the bureaucratic process. We are fighting bureaucratic physics. Sometimes we achieve, sometimes we don't achieve. To me, ultimately, that's one of the arguments for why keeping a military leader in charge of a district, a military leader who rotates out on a regular basis every 2 to 3 years, helps fight and resist bureaucratic physics in a way that somebody who is in a position for extended multiple years has a tendency to fall into the trap of bureaucratic physics. So how do I, if I'm an SES, I'm a senior civilian, how do I demonstrate my worth and value to the enterprise? Well, like in the private sector, I demonstrate my worth and value by having higher profit margins per employee or expanding the marketplace in which we are doing our business. Well, in the federal government, I'm not going to have the return on investment that the private sector has. Rather, I'm showing, how am I more broadly meeting the needs of, or broadening the mission of what we can do and impact. So that all plays into bureaucratic physics. So we don't have, there's different drivers at work. That's why the laws of bureaucratic physics don't apply in the private sector, because you have the almighty dollar keeps that in check, right? Because it's ultimately about profitability. Whether it's a privately owned company or a publicly owned company, it's about profitability of the business. So, well, what was interesting is just a month earlier in February, Ted Struck, DPM and I, we're sitting around talking about, because I'm about halfway through command at that point. The big rocks I'd been working were pretty much wrapped up or had been wrapped up at that point. What was I going to focus my attention on the second half of command? Because it looked like we had a pretty smooth path ahead, which gave me a lot of latitude or flexibility on what I wanted to prioritize and emphasize. We were talking a fair bit about that. And then the flood happened, which took all that stuff off the table. Like, we were going to do this whole revolutionizing acquisition process stuff, and really at the district level try to push some change there. We're going to focus a lot more attention on some of the hydropower issues, Air Force Academy for MILCON. A lot of that stuff just got put on the back burner with the flood. We knew that by late February, we knew we were going to have a lot of water in the system. We knew there was going to at least be localized flooding events likely happen during the spring melt. We were concerned because of the significant snowpack that existed here in the middle section of the basin between Nebraska, northeast Iowa, South Dakota, even into a little bit of North Dakota. There was a lot of snow on the ground, a lot of moisture. What we didn't anticipate was how incredibly quickly it melted with that rain event, how dramatic the impacts were going to be by the frozen ground, and how quickly all the tributaries in the middle third of the basin all met or exceeded their historic floods, all simultaneously, putting such a massive surge in the system that it was completely overwhelmed. As we didn't start getting forecast from the team of levees being overtopped until we were about 3 or 4 days out from the levees being overtopped. And from that perspective, as an agency, I think we learned a lot. And on the communications, it just happened so quick. There was also this built-in bias that existed in 2011, a very different flood event, where we were able to warn the communities, impacted communities along the middle and lower portion of the basin, hey, there's a big flood coming. It's going to be here in 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to be a sustained high water event that could lead to levees, levee failures. Start being prepared, take action, move your stuff out of the floodplain, empty the corn and soybean out of the bins, get everything to high ground. So the communities had time to respond, had time to prepare. And so I think both the district and the communities, nobody really believed that the flood could happen in 72 hours, to the incredible devastation we saw. We had, and so a lot of folks were caught flat-footed, both in the district, in the local emergency management agencies in the states, within the levee boards, to the individual farmers out there. Everybody thought, well, we'll have a few days, we'll have a few weeks, and within 72 hours, the levees on the main stem were being overtopped. The system had well over 400,000 cubic feet per second of water from the confluence of the Platte and the Missouri South, a system that even at its best could only have handled 300,000, maybe even less than that. So it completely overwhelmed the system. And it was devastating to see. It was difficult, and even to this day, there are elements of the community that have a difficult time accepting that we had no ability to influence the flows, no significant ability. It was all that surge that came in and devastated the levees all came from unregulated tributaries. Right? We turned off the river for 6 or 8 out of a 10-day period at Fort Randall. There was zero flow out of Fort Randall, which is the second dam up in the system. And the maximum flow that came out of Gavin's Point was for about 6 hours at 100,000. But by the time that 100,000 CFS reached Omaha, it was the levees had been decimated 2 days earlier. Now, it did still continue to contribute significant water in the system, but you already had a decimated levee system. That flood, the proximate cause of the levees being overtopped was in excess of 250,000 CFS coming down the Platte River and flowing into the Missouri, which at the time was flowing at nearly 200,000 CFS. So the Platte River for several days in there exceeded the flow on the Missouri where they come together at the confluence. And individuals will bring up, well, it's because of you have chutes in the river, or because you haven't been spending more time on levee maintenance, or you haven't maintained channel capacity. None of that made a hill of beans difference when you have a third more than the system can handle flow. Those levees were overtopped for 3 to 4 days. The overtopping erosion that happened was catastrophic for the levee system, and no chute in the system had any influence over the ability to save that. If those chutes didn't exist at all, those levees were all still getting overtopped. If those chutes were in some different direction, those levees were all getting overtopped. And where the breaches are have no correlation to where those chutes were 20 or 30 feet below the water level.
Now,
a lot of that revolved around a lot of meetings, a lot of one-on-one meetings. I think it was great. The governors came together from the 4 southern states in the basin, Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri, and we had 4 or 5 meetings with the governors, all together in a room, talking through the issues, just right over here in Council Bluffs, and informing them on the challenges, between the unregulated tributaries, where the dams were, what capabilities existed or did not exist in the system, what the impacts of the damages were. And that created a forum for a lot of really good dialogue between both the state and federal level as we wrestled with how to implement the PL 8499 authorities, where we could and couldn't execute that. That was then followed by numerous meetings with individual members of Congress, with governors in their offices and with their leads. Like in Iowa, I had extensive meetings with Paul Trombino, who was the governor's deputy, to really work these levee issues, and I think we had a great working relationship there and addressing all kinds of challenges along the Iowa stretch. And so it really did lead to a lot of good dialogue at both the state and federal level. between the district and those various stakeholders. And we've seen the benefits of that with the levee system largely restored in the Omaha sector, all those federal levees, most of which are in Iowa, but some are in Nebraska and the northwest corner of Missouri. That wouldn't have been able to be achieved without the dialogue, the continuous dialogue with the stakeholders since then. We had challenges right out the gate with our engagements with the levee boards. I think we as an agency could have and should have done better in the first week or two with our engagements with the stakeholders, the levee boards specifically. But I think we worked through that in relatively short order and now have a very healthy, very good working relationship with all of our levee boards in the system. Well, phase 3, which is the study of the lower basin to look for how we could have a more robust, more resilient levee system that could better handle these events. I think it's an important study to go forward. I'm pessimistic in terms of how much real improvement it'll ultimately yield in the system because of the scope of the study and how quickly it's getting to be done. I think ultimately the study is going to identify some of the major challenges in the system and provide some recommendations which will lead to additional studies which could then lead to actual projects that improve the system. I think to do one holistic study that looks from Sioux City all the way to St. Louis and expect to have executable projects out of it is overly optimistic. However, I do think we do need a larger study to help define various reaches within the river where work should be focused, and that would then generate a more focused study within that specific reach to come up with recommendations. I think it's also important as we do this study that while many of the stakeholders out there see the solution is bigger, more robust, higher levees, that while that may be an element in the solution, it is but only one element that's considered. I think we need to look at overall processes that the system is managed. How do we manage it more as a holistic system, similar to how the Mississippi River Commission, maybe we need to have a Missouri River Commission. But also, as we look at segments of the river, bigger, higher levees or realigned levees is only one part of the thing. We also need to look at how are the local communities doing their zoning on the landward side of the levee? What are we doing on the river side of the levee in terms of agricultural levees that are being put in by various farmers? How are we managing internal drainage within the system? Should there be floodways in the system where we accept a section of levee to be overtop, maybe reinforce that levee section so that it can be overtop for a sustained period of time with some type of outlet structure on the lower end of that levee section? So there's a lot that could be addressed beyond just raising and moving levees, because ultimately you end up at a point where the diminishing returns in the costs of the levee. Remember, the basin is this below the levees is about 90 feet of sand. And the bigger you make the levees, the more head pressure that's against the levee, the more you have to compensate to prevent under seepage of levees, which means longer seepage berms on the landward side. So you consume more land with that, or extensive cutoff walls being built. Very expensive solutions to the problem. So you end up getting to a point where the higher you get the levee, the greater the cost and the higher risk that gets built into the system. So you can only go so high with levees until there's a diminishing return. So there's other solutions that need to be looked at in the system. One of the things I wish I I'd had an opportunity to engage with levee sponsors more before the flood and really had a better relationship established there. You know, as an organization, we had a good relationship already there, but I personally hadn't met with the levee sponsors prior to the flood. I think that would have been really helpful. Some of the other things, you know, throughout my time here, given the scope of the program, I learn about additional elements or aspects of the organization that I didn't know about before. With 1,200 plus employees, program that's not only across our huge area of responsibility, but really across the nation. I'm continually learning about a new, project here or a project there that I didn't necessarily know much about. You know, I maybe understood the program at a larger scale, but specific projects and the relationships associated with that. One of the things that I had anticipated doing was spending a lot more time at our 6 main stem dams and the associated offices up there, whether it was the Natural Resource Office or the Hydropower Office, and get to know the folks in the field up there a lot more on the operations side. The previous district I commanded was primarily just a civil works district. As a result, I spent a lot of time at the hydropower plants and with our natural resource team out with the rangers, even doing, some boundary walks and stuff with the rangers. Here in this district, because of the scope of the mission and dealing with stuff at the programmatic level, I didn't get the same level of engagement at the field level as I previously had or as I anticipated doing. So I didn't get up to the main stem dams nearly as much as I would have liked. I didn't have nearly as much interaction with our natural resources teams as I would have liked, because so much of it was focused on programmatic levels. I did get out to see a lot of our construction offices more, mostly because there was various construction-related issues that required my attention. The operations side pretty much kept going on without big disruptions, aside from the flood, and hence it didn't require a lot of my engagement. So, hindsight, I would like to get the hydropower dams more, natural resource teams more, and then up to some of our remote offices, particularly some of our regulatory offices that are scattered around the district's footprint. Well, it certainly is a challenge, but in the Corps environment in general, it's a little easier to do than the tactical Army to have a work-life balance. And I have a fair bit of influence over the schedule. Now, during the day, really from 8 o'clock until 5 or so, my calendar is pretty much packed. I maybe don't have a lot of influence over that, but I can influence the travel schedule. I would have preferred traveling a little less than the job required, so there was more travel in there. Oftentimes I was traveling as many as 3 weeks a month, certainly two weeks a month. And that really does, the traveling is where the biggest impact is on the work-life balance. But within a Corps assignment, I was rarely gone on the weekends, so I was almost always home for the weekends, fully engaged. And I was home for dinner at a reasonable, by 6, pretty much if I was working in the office on almost all those days. So it was manageable. Well, I think one of the ways that the military experiences help be effective in this environment is it helps train an individual to be more adaptable, more flexible, able to handle a sudden unanticipated change better, uncertainty. I'm more comfortable, I think, in uncertainty than a lot of the civilian organization, which is more resistant to change, uncomfortable in uncertainty. I think the military trains you to be comfortable in that environment and be decisive, and I think that's one of the big areas where it helped prepare me for a job like this, where each day is different, right? Rarely do I have a day that was like the previous day. Different meetings, different engagement, different problems to address. So I think the military experience definitely trains one to be an effective district commander. Well, I've been fortunate. I've had a number of jobs where I had a significant civilian workforce that I was part of as a peer or in charge of both the previous district command and working at Defense Logistics Agency, an organization where about half our office was civilian and half was military. But one of the big differences, obviously in command of a civilian organization or a Corps of Engineer district versus a military unit, is I think the need to be more, to build consensus, the need to be persuasive and explaining why you need a certain task or action taken. Whereas a military unit, you pretty much just say, go do this. You didn't have to necessarily explain your reasoning or justification for it. And you would have a very responsive organization based on that direction. A civilian organization, I think you need to get their understanding or their buy-in on what you're directing them to do. They may not be quite as responsive as I always liked, but in general, if I was able to make it clear why I was asking for something to be done and the rationale behind it, the civilian organization brought a lot more experience and technical competency in a given job or field than maybe the military unit does, because in the military unit, there's this constant churn and turnover, where in the civilian workforce, you have individuals who've been in the same position or in the same office, for years on end. So their understanding the systems and processes is much better than sometimes in the military unit. That is definitely one of the challenges in the job, because there are so many issues getting thrown at the commander on a daily basis. Part of it is making a judgment call is how important is this particular issue or topic? Do I just need a superficial understanding of it, or do I need a deeper understanding of it? Right? How much time do I focus on this issue versus how much do I just trust? All right, this document's in front of me. It's been thoroughly vetted through the organization. Can I trust that it's good, what's in there? I know I can trust the team. It's a team of experts. So some things, one could say, well, I'm accepting risk. I'm not reviewing it in detail because, that team I trust, that part of the organization, what's the risk if there's an error with it? So maybe I just need a general understanding of the issue. Other stuff, particularly really complex issues, which don't have clear, obvious solutions, I need to dedicate time and energy to understand better, read more thoroughly the products that are in front of me, whether that's a report, a briefing, so that I can make a reasonable decision. If there's something that I think is particularly important, I'm still unclear on facts based on what's been presented either in an email or written document, I'll go ahead and have the team schedule a meeting where we can have a discussion where I can ask the questions, probe a little bit more. But one of the biggest challenges is just managing the email flow, right? Triaging the email, determining what do I need to spend time in reading that's in the email versus, what do I trust that other people in the organization are taking care of and managing versus where do I put my time and effort. I have found that managing email probably be one of the bigger challenges on the information flow part of it, because it's really easy for individuals to CC me, right? Oh, the colonel might want to know this, so they CC. Well, it is interesting. I don't want to say it's not, but there's a lot of information. So a lot of times if I see who it was really directed to, if it was directed to a corporate board member and I was just CC'd, I won't maybe spend a lot of time reading it. If it is directly to me, then I'll spend more time reading it. So you got to filter those areas too. But information overload is a danger, is a challenge. Workplace culture, that's a tough question, because first, unlike in the tactical unit or Army where a commander comes in and in their 2 years as a commander of the organization, they really do shape the culture of that battalion, of that brigade. in a way that I don't think a district commander does, or at least to that extent. And part of that is, in a tactical unit, the commander comes in, there's a lot of turnover already in the unit, right? A third of the organization probably leaves each year. Whereas in a USACE, in a district, you don't have that kind of turnover. I mean, what's our turnover is about 8% attrition rate. So you have individuals who are in the district for decades. They can stand at the wall with all the pictures of the past colonels and tell you stories about the colonel 10 colonels back. And so while I think a district commander can influence and impact the culture, it's not nearly as significant or dramatic as a in a tactic unit. Now, with that said, a toxic command climate, if a colonel has a toxic command climate, can have more dramatic impacts on the organization. But most commanders don't bring a toxic command climate to them, and so I think their impact on the culture is somewhat limited. I think the DPM and the corporate board members, especially as they're in the position for an extended period of time, as some of our corporate board members have been in position more than a decade, they have significant influence on the long-term culture of the organization. And in addition, I think the Corps' culture is impacted a lot by what's happening in society in general, because most individuals stay within the district or from that local area. A lot of them are born and raised in the local area, and so as the direction the culture trends in the local area influences our own culture within the district. Now, I do think we're going to be going through a major cultural change here right now. We're in the midst of it with the whole COVID epidemic, with the max telework, as we move to a much higher percentage of the workforce teleworking on a daily basis. That's going to have some long-term cultural impacts. I don't know what those will ultimately be, but it does concern me some as we look at the core family as a big part of how we retain folks. I think individuals like being part of an organization that's not just about the bottom line, but it's about really dealing with the nation's infrastructure, about dealing with coming up with tough technical challenges to national problems, whether it's in the civil works, military, environmental side. And if we become an increasingly telework-based organization, there's a disconnect that develops. And so why would I keep working at the Corps if I really don't feel a sense of connectivity with my fellow employees, when I can go down, telework for a big AE firm or a prime contractor, and make a fair bit more money if relationships aren't as big a part of it. So I'm concerned in the long run of cultural shifts, and the next commander will certainly have to address that challenge. So another part of your question was, how do I think I've affected the culture? I guess that's hard for me to say. It's hard for me to judge. Certainly I was concerned about our workforce and in terms of trying to improve the work environment. Some of the initiatives we did, like the blinds in the building, the stand-up desks, we're going to be improving the conference room. All of that was intended to improve the quality of the work environment. To an extent that can influence the culture. I encouraged active participation in a lot of events which brought district together, whether that's the paint-a-thon, the district picnic, and we did a few other things, like we did a baseball night. We recently just did a little golf scramble. All of that can help reinforce the culture. So I think the Corps as an enterprise, so we're talking, the 9 divisions, the 43 districts, creates a tremendous opportunity, especially for a young recent college graduate. And I would encourage that individual, whether they're an engineer, contracting, real estate, natural resources, whatever career field they're in within the Corps, to look for opportunities to continue to grow and expand in that field. And that may mean not staying just in your current office. and just waiting for the next position above you to open up, but look for other opportunities. There's a whole adventure out there. Go move from this district, go to another district, and jump around a little bit between districts. I mean, you can go over to Europe for 3 to 5 years and do a similar job to what you're doing now, or maybe a totally different job over there. You know, it's such a vast enterprise with over 30,000 positions, roles within the district. You know, don't let yourself get pigeonholed. If you're pigeonholed in the Corps of Engineers in the job you're doing, it's because you have decided, you have opted to be pigeonholed in that job. It's not like the private sector where they're just focused on how can you maximize the benefit for the company in terms of your expertise. In the Corps, you get lots of opportunity. Volunteer to be on deploying teams, whether that's the Blue Roof team that does disaster response, or special missions that pop up like the wall mission right now. 2 years ago, we had a lot of individuals from the district who went down to Puerto Rico to help with the power mission, hurricane recovery. There's lots of opportunities to do short developmental assignments, not just within our district, but across the Corps. You should chase after those things and really, explore what's possible out there, broaden your abilities, broaden your skills, broaden your experiences, and I think you'll find being part of the Corps to be an incredibly rewarding career. Well, obviously, senior leader engagement with staff is vitally important if the district's going to be successful, right? Because that senior leader engagement not only ensures the missions being executed, but provides the subordinates within the organization an understanding of what the expectations are, provides them with mission and purpose, with good engagement, provides them with the feedback they need to improve. And too often, I think supervisors, particularly junior level supervisors, but it's also true with some of the senior level supervisors, are hesitant to give good direct feedback to subordinates who aren't meeting expectations, or the supervisor doesn't do a good job of articulating the expectations. Therefore, the employee, the supervisor, are on a different wavelength. Supervisor's like, I don't know why that individual is not providing what I need. That individual thinks they are providing what they need. And so good communication is vital if we're going to be successful at our mission. Otherwise, you have breakdown, then you have more friction. Friction creates additional problems. And that all starts at the senior leader level, right? Effectively communicating with their subordinate supervisors, giving clear expectations, clear vision and direction, holding individuals accountable, and recognizing outstanding performance. Organizationally, I think we've struggled at recognizing outstanding performers. I like to think we've improved in that area, but we've still been an area that I would like to see greater improvement with the supervisors. Now, as we go to the age of COVID, how do we do that? Right, in the past, one of the ways a supervisor, whether a senior level or a junior supervisor, did it was go by the person's cubicle, their office space, and engage and have a conversation, or talking in a meeting environment. Now that's tougher, obviously. But supervisors can, with the different software packages we have, such as WebEx or some of the other video software, they could drop in on or set up calls regularly with their subordinates to see how they're doing, just checking in, and they need to use that and not just through a phone call, although I love phone calls. Phone calls are good too, but with Skype and these other, Skype for Business and these other things, we can engage very quickly, supervisor to subordinate, in a way that we didn't used to. And they're going to have to become increasingly comfortable at using that technology in a max telework environment to ensure that they are setting those expectations and having that back and forth engagement. So I like to think I had a very good work relationship with the corporate board. We'd meet formally once a month, typically on a Friday. But informally, I would engage with most of the corporate board multiple times a week, some of them on a nearly daily basis, talking a wide variety of issues. We certainly had a lot of email back and forth with the corporate board. And so there was a lot of communication. There needs to be a lot of communication between the commander and the corporate board, because ultimately they're the ones who are making sure everything gets executed. They're the ones ensuring we have the right processes, the right structure, the right organization in place to execute. So that dialogue is very important. We also, as a corporate board, about halfway through my time here at the district, did a corporate board retreat. We went down to Kansas City, and we spent two days together, getting to know each other a little better, working through, understanding each other's personalities better, and just spending some time disengaged from the day-to-day work, and work on, what is the district's direction, what is our, what's our mission, how do we fit in that mission. And I think that did a lot to help us gel as a group, because at the time we'd had a couple new corporate board members join the team. I had at that point figured out really kind of what I was trying to get accomplished in the district, what my objectives were. So it ended up, I think, being a very beneficial event. In addition to that, at least pre-COVID, I'd, on a somewhat regular basis, have the whole corporate board over, and we'd have some social events at my home, so we could also interact some outside of work. So that relationship, that dynamic is important to foster as a district commander, and there's lots of ways to do it. And the corporate board in general was pretty active in most of the other district events, like the paint-a-thon. They would do that. Certainly they were a big part of the district picnic. Several of them always were the ones on the barbecue, on the grill, cooking up the food. So it's a lot of good interaction. I think over time I improved in the communication area with the staff, and one of the areas, as I look back, as I look at the entire organization, communicating largely with the 1,200 employees, early on I decided not to do the large town halls over at the DoubleTree, which has often been done in the past for a number of reasons. One, I don't think they're necessarily the most effective forums to communicate with the organization. Second, there's a lot of cost and expense involved with it. And then I moved to doing smaller town hall-like events within branches or sections or offices, which were in many ways effective at least getting that good dialogue with the employees, because they'd be more willing to be open. It's a smaller, more intimate setting than when you have a room with several hundred individuals in it. But there was a little something lost too in that, not doing the larger events. Here towards the end of command, we're now starting to do a lot of the virtual town halls, and I think those are proving to be very valuable to connect with the workforce. In hindsight, I would have liked to have started these virtual town halls on a regular basis, at least quarterly, maybe even as much as monthly, 30 minutes, talking through a variety of issues. The town halls recently have predominantly focused on COVID, but there's lots of other things to talk about too. We're going into fourth quarter right now. We could talk about that. So there's, as our PAO office has improved and strengthened their capabilities, I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for the incoming commander to really expand on communication with the workforce beyond what I did. I did regular emails out to the workforce, but not everybody reads those. So first, I'd start out by just expressing my appreciation for them wanting to be part of the team, not just the district team, but really part of the Army team, and supporting the nation and dealing with our nation's infrastructure. And I think that's important, that we're part of something bigger than just a job. And that's what I think the district offers. That's one of the reasons I love being part of the Corps of Engineers, because of the mission and the scale of the mission, the impact of that mission. So I'd thank them for being willing to be part of that, because a lot of the position in the Corps, you probably could get at least as much or even more pay in the private sector, but folks have decided to be part of this. So I thank them for that, and their workload, their commitment to the team. when we've had these natural disasters, we've had a huge number of individuals across the district who volunteered, whether that's to go to Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, hurricane response, or more recently here in the district's area with the flood. And a huge percentage of districts stepped up and said, hey, send me, I want to be part of the response. And that's very rewarding to be part of an organization like that. Public Affairs Office is obviously an important part of the district, both from the perspective of engaging external to the district and the internal communications. And in both areas, I think we've improved over the last 3 years. We've grown the staff. We've grown, I think, the focus of how we're using those assets and resources. And that's going to be important going forward, especially in this digital age. I think in the Corps in general, we're behind industry in terms of how we leverage technology, in many ways to include how we leverage technology to communicate both internally and externally. So I'd encourage the future commanders to really look at doing more videos, more engagement with workforce that way, because especially with our large dispersed geographic district, it's impossible to get out to every field office. It doesn't happen. Or when you do get there, there's such a gap in between that there's a loss in that connection, that office. And this technology today is able to close that gap. During this COVID, we did some virtual tours where General Helmlinger and myself engaged with three of our hydropower plants in virtual tours. And that proved to be a very beneficial event, both for him and me, as well as I think the project offices where the OPMs, our operation project managers, were able to highlight different individuals on their natural resource teams, their admin teams, their hydropower teams, and the great work that's being done in there. They were able to identify some of their challenges and eliminated a lot of the travel time, the travel expense, and I think we had a lot of benefit out of it. So while Public Affairs wasn't directly involved in those events, it's that same technology that Public Affairs leverages that enables us to more broadly talk both internally and externally to our stakeholders. So our social media presence, I didn't pay a lot of attention to our social media presence really until the flood event. And then that social media platforms became vitally important, communicating particularly with the general public. And I think it's a good way for individuals, particularly in field offices, where they don't have a broader perspective of the district's full mission, to know what's going on, know what they're part of, so that it's not just about my regulatory office, my natural resource office, and the specific mission you have, but you can see that you're part of a bigger, broader team. You can know what's going on, you know where the challenges are and our successes. And we're having lots of successes. We have a lot of folks who win awards, external to the district awards, that get recognized through that process. So it's a great way internally to know what's going on, and it helps shape, what's the public's understanding and knowledge of us. So knowing what's going on our social media page allows individuals to better articulate what we're doing to support our communities. That's certainly a big part of the job, right, for a commander. I mean, the easy decisions are already resolved and taken care of before they get up to the command level. So most of the decisions that are left for the commander to deal with are difficult decisions where there's not necessarily a clear right or wrong answer, or maybe both answers, neither one is ideal, and a decision needs to be made. So a couple things. One, in the Corps environment, most of the time, well, not always, most of the time, you don't have to make a very rapid, quick, decisive decision. Like a tactical unit where oftentimes you have to make a quick, decisive decision. So you'll have more time to work with, more time to consider the various course of actions, more time to socialize potential decisions with key leaders, primarily your corporate board, but maybe some of the branch chiefs level. Even socialize it among the workforce, which will be specifically impacted by whatever that decision is. So you have a little more time to gather information. You have time to build a consensus if needed on the decision. There's not a lot of decisions that I made with the corporate board where we first didn't work through it as a group to build a consensus. And all of that reduces risks to a lot of the decisions, or at least gains a better understanding of what risks are being accepted with the decision. Well, I like MacGyver, I guess, on that. I mean, MacGyver's a pretty darn good engineer, it seems to me, in their ability to fix things. I always liked that show back in the day. I think it's the day-to-day interaction with individuals, whether it's here in the building or going out to project sites. It's always fun to go out with project sites, meet with stakeholders, meet with our teams on the ground. It's fun to interact with individuals here in the building, to work through tough problems. And then we have to get in the conference room, kind of hash out the pros and cons of various decisions. I think that's really engaging, and part of what I'll miss. Just being part of a really big organization that's doing great work. Oh, geez, that's a hard question to answer. You know, every commander, when they take command of a district, is going to be defined by some event or accomplishment that the organization happened. And in most cases, it's outside the control of that district commander at the time. Either they got there and was fortunate enough to be there when a major project got completed, and they get, in some way their command gets tied with, well, that was the commander who completed this project or that project, or some major event happened. You know, and certainly here during my 3 years, we've had 2 major events. The most significant, at least in the near term, has been the flood. You know, we'll still see how ultimately significant the whole COVID event proves to be, but both of which had a lot of challenges for the organization to address and work through. And so I guess to an extent, I'll be judged by how effectively folks viewed my response and leadership during those 2 events, the flood and the COVID. So, and I'm not exactly sure what that will be. I like to think it'll be positive. Well, that's a good question. So, you know, I think any colonel that gets a chance to command a district, regardless of the district, is an incredibly fortunate individual, because district command in general is a great honor and a challenge and incredibly a rewarding experience. So even for all those lesser districts, they should still feel fortunate to have the opportunity to command that. Now, to get to command the best district in the Corps of Engineers, I think I was incredibly fortunate, because I got to command both the best lieutenant colonel district in the Corps in Nashville, which had an unbelievable mission, an unbelievable staff, and then to come around and have the opportunity to command the best colonel district, and really one of the largest districts in the Corps, the largest geographically, and depending on which program you're measuring, in top 2 or 3 in almost every other program, is an incredible honor and an incredibly rewarding experience to be involved with, to be part of that team. And, you know, I guess, you know, not everybody gets the opportunity to command the best district, but I got very fortunate. Somebody's got to do it, and I was the lucky guy who got to do it for the last 3 years. And the next commander, he'll be pinching himself every day too, that he got to command Omaha District.